This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
What I aim to create is what a true safe space looks like, because our job isn't to fix you. It's not to talk through your trauma and resolve it or provide any kind of therapeutic resources. What we are meant to do is tell your story.
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. Today's guest is Sarah Turner, CEO and founder of My Modern Tribute. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
Today's episode is sponsored by Odonata Care. Odonata's motto is, "Care is treatment." They have a mission to transform the end-of-life experience for the patient and caregivers through education and support. Odonata Care is revolutionizing the hospice experience with their booklet, The Care Plan, A Path to Comfort for the Hospice Patient, along with 50 free YouTube videos that teach the basics of bedside care. Visit thecareplan.net for more information. Now, here's today's episode.
I love all my guests, but I really love the enthusiasm and the passion of today's guest, Sarah Turner. Sarah is the CEO and founder of My Modern Tribute. She's worked in a variety of industries, but one thing stayed consistent during those years. It was her passion for people. She's learned that we all have stories to share and that we're all interconnected. We're in a shared human story. Sarah believes everyone deserves a space to express their feelings, and she knows the importance of empathy and warmth. So she has created a space for this, a warm, safe space to tell your story in My Modern Tribute. She believes that helping others explore their mortality is one of the keys to success and fulfillment. So she's going to be telling us about My Modern Tribute and the work they're doing there. So here's my discussion with Sarah Turner of My Modern Tribute. Sarah, it's great to have you here on the Heart of Hospice podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Helen. I appreciate it.
I'm excited to talk to you, but we're going to start before we jump into My Modern Tribute. I'm going to ask you an icebreaker question that I didn't send you in advance, so you weren't expecting it. If you were having a conversation with a friend, what's one small thing they might not know about you?
One small thing they might not know about me. I think that I emit a lot of joy. And I think that can be misconstrued as someone who doesn't take things too seriously. And I don't think people understand the depth and the level of sensitivity that I have. I think I do kind of keep that hidden for certain individuals in certain spaces and conversations. But I think most people would say, like, wow, she's always laughing. There's always a lot of joy. They would never expect, even when I say, if I meet someone new, I say, what do you think I do for a living? And then when I tell them, they say, wow, I would never expect that. And so that's kind of my hidden thing is I don't think people understand that I feel very deeply and I care deeply about the experiences of others. And I would say I don't think I've told many people that actually. So that is a vulnerable moment.
Yeah, I think it's going to show in our conversation today because we are going to be digging into the deep stuff and the work that you're doing. So let's start with that. My Modern Tribute, what made you start it and what services do you provide through My Modern Tribute?
Well, first, we help people write their own life tributes before they pass. So it's the same idea and concept around if you go to an estate attorney and you go and create your will or your estate plan, this goes hand in hand with that. There's a level of financial responsibility, but I believe there's a level of emotional preparation and responsibility that goes with it. So we help individuals write, their own eulogy, but we call it tribute because eulogy tends to have a negative connotation or just a direct association with death. And given the fact that America tends to be death phobic, I found that tribute is a much more positive spin, a nice little synonym there. So my idea was born out of grief and ownership. So the grief part was from my first love when I was 17. His name was Andy. And his death completely changed me. And I'm very fortunate. That's the only person that I've lost in my life where I've had to deal with death at a devastating, just absolute blew me away in terms of feelings I've never felt before. And around his death anniversary, it was 7 years after, I just was sitting there thinking, I wish I could have heard like his last words or his spin on life. He was just such an exciting, wicked smart, very incredible story, moved from Lithuania and started, barely spoke English. And anyway, just an incredible individual. And his story would have been really neat to hear from his words. And I was sitting on the couch watching Netflix and I thought, I wonder if people do that. I wonder if people are actually writing their own eulogy before they die. And I know that's a therapy exercise. I've heard of that before,
right? But
I was wondering if there are people who offer that service. And I went down a rabbit hole of 3 to 4 hours of research. And I couldn't find anyone that was doing it on a larger scale or even a smaller scale. So I thought, all right, I got to do this. Like, this is totally my calling because I grew up reading Chicken Soup for the Teenage Soul and all of those books. And I've always been obsessed with, heritage and my ancestors and where do we come from and who are you and what drives you, what makes you you. And Humans of New York has been deeply inspiring. And I thought, like, if I could create something out of my love for human stories and connection, then I will feel like I've won the jackpot. So that was my initial kind of push. And the other thing is the ownership over my own narrative. And even my own life has been pretty colorful and sometimes chaotic. And I would want my words, my humor, my bluntness, and how I feel about those that I love written. I would not want anyone else in my family to write it. And I'm extremely close with my family. I talk to my mom every single day. My dad is the most amazing man I've ever met. I'm so fortunate for what I have with my sister and my brother. And however, it's my story. It's not theirs. And I think COVID showed us that death is right. It can just come out of nowhere in terms of, you heard of 30 and 35-year-olds. No matter if you believe in vaccination or any other complications with COVID, it was right in front of us. You just couldn't deny it. We all had to start looking at death in a different way than I think any other time before. And I believe that it was proven given the initial influx of clients, that having ownership over your narrative is a direct link to the mental health movement. So you can't embrace, endorse, or support the mental health and healing movement without also giving the same type of respect and care towards the death wellness movement, because they do go hand in hand. Because, we're beginning to discuss trauma and healing and nervous system regulation at a really high level of acceptance and openness. And we're pushing towards mental health reform and recognizing the relationship between trauma and mental illness and grief, and creating accessible therapeutic resources. And you look at us from a culture, we are desperate for authentic connection and safe relationships and to feel accepted and loved. But by majority, we're completely ignoring death wellness as like I said, America continues to be death phobic. And that's the exact kind of toxic positivity that we're fighting in the mental health movement. So I look at it and I think, well, where do I fit in all of this? So how does my modern tribute fit? And I think that what I aim to create is what a true safe space looks like, because our job isn't to fix you. It's not to talk through your trauma and resolve it or provide any kind of therapeutic resources. What we are meant to do is tell your story and tell it how you want it to be told. We are a sounding board. We hold your hand through the process, but we don't tell you how to write it or what it needs to look like. That comes out naturally from you. And so I believe that we are like a little door. So it's kind of opening up the door to like, see, that wasn't so bad. We got your story written, and do you have a will yet? Like, if you want, like, you might want to consider it. And, because I think if you look at the stats on 40-year-olds and, the millennials, I don't think the preparation is there. I think we're terrified of it. But I see us as a gateway into opening your eyes to what can be and kind of connecting that and being a bridge. So that's what started it.
I love all the intention and thought that goes behind that. So the choice of tribute is very intentional. What do you think is so paralyzing about writing a eulogy? Because I've known people that were writing for someone, a life partner, a spouse, a parent, and totally drawing a blank and feeling paralyzed. And of course, I think if somebody said, okay, for me, say, Helen, you need to write your own eulogy, I think I would be stuck.
I couldn't do it either.
For a while. No, I think but what do you think is so paralyzing about having to write a eulogy? Most eulogies aren't very expansive. You're not truly telling the story of a person's life.
Mm-hmm.
But why do you think that's so paralyzing for people?
I think it is a multitude of things. I think if you're trying to write a eulogy for someone else and you're in grief, I don't create well, because writing is an art, and honoring someone's life is an art form. Most people by nature aren't writers. Most people by nature, I believe, have a hard time expressing themselves unless they have taken the time and energy to do some self-exploration. So that's just writing for someone else, especially when you're in grief. It's hard to function. I go into a freeze state. I can barely do anything. Right. Writing your own. And so when I started this whole idea, I thought, okay, well, I can't go tell people, what I'm doing if I don't have my own tribute written myself. When I sat down to write my own tribute, I was totally stuck after, I think it was 3 or 4 sentences. And I started crying because I thought, I'm so self-aware, or so I thought I was, that I should be able to knock this out. I love to write. I consider myself like a natural. I've been journaling and writing for, my whole life. But I realized if it's so hard for me, how is the average person going to be able to do this? And I realized you need someone to walk you through it, and you need to be regulated. So I even tell my clients, okay, make sure, whatever keeps you calm. I don't suggest, some people would have a glass of wine during the conversation. I'm like, probably don't go past one. Make sure you're hydrated in a quiet space. You have your favorite blanket. You have your dog with you, your cat. You feel calm, because that's when you're able to be the most open, and we're able to draw a lot out of you. We can tell that given the fact that we do send out a questionnaire prior, and then I'm able to look at someone's questionnaire and we know, push here, ask this, we have a quick brainstorming session before the call. And I only have writers who are able to be completely open, little to no bias. I wouldn't say completely no bias, because we're human. Everyone has a bit of bias, but
sure.
It's my rule that your commitment is to tell their story. I don't care if it's conflicting with your political opinions or personal beliefs. It's our job to tell that story. And is that going to be an issue? Because if it will be, then maybe this isn't the job for you.
Yeah.
And when you have a writer who's able to deliver that space for someone, so much comes out. The person's little idiosyncrasies and cute little quips and their little jokes, and just so much comes out that they're able to capture and weave into something that truly reflects you, to the point where you look at it and say, oh my gosh, that's me on paper. And that's a whole other experience in and of itself. It's almost startling. You're like, that's actually me. And I feel so exposed. But at the same time, it can be so enlightening and powerful, especially with those who have had traumatic backgrounds. And, I do want to share a piece that I did ask for permission from the client of what that can kind of look like. And not that it's some giant, situation where a client is bashing all the family and
right.
a big negative
rattling all
situation.
the skeletons in the closet.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which, if someone wants to go that route, that's what they want to do. But we truly put it into a work of art to where that can also provide, from a practical standpoint, eulogy guidance for family members who are grief-stricken and they want to write something for your celebration of life or funeral, but they don't know where to start. And if you have a tribute and you get to see that ahead of time, you can say, I completely forgot about that memory, or, oh, I forgot. Like, you can find inspiration because you have a template, you have a guide that's from the person whose life you are celebrating. So I truly believe that it's up to the person who has passed to be able to create that for other individuals and their family. It's an ultimate act of love. It really is. Because I know for a fact that, if something were to happen to me, my partner, he would have no idea he couldn't put anything down. He'd be a disaster.
Yeah, my husband's the same way.
He would just shut down. Yeah. So that's the ultimate act of, don't worry, I already handled it. Because that's what I do in our day-to-day anyway. Don't worry, honey, I already handled it. And there's a lot of peace that comes with it.
As a female, I kind of like that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things it says on your website is that a different version of someone exists in other people's minds. So, like if I have 10 friends, each of them has a different version of me. My kids have a different version of me. My sister has a different version of me. What does that mean? And why is that even important when it comes to writing a tribute?
Well, there's a positive side to that, and then there's a little bit of a realistic negative side. So I'll start with the negative and end with the positive. So, for example, how your cousin may view you can be drastically different than how your sister views you. And maybe it's not the most positive viewpoint. Maybe you guys had, different friction over political beliefs or the way you lived your life, or just typical family drama. We all have it. However, what if your cousin is the only writer in the family? And now they're the ones in charge of your eulogy, and their version of you is probably not the version you want written. And so back to a different version of you exists. So I always say 17-year-old Sarah is drastically different than 30-year-old Sarah or 33-year-old Sarah. I've evolved so much, and my friendships and my experiences have evolved so much that even my softball coach would have, from my elementary years, would have something totally different to say about me than my swimming coach when I was a teenager, or my personal trainer would have something different to say about me. There's all these different ways that people have experienced me and you, given personality types, the situation, where you're at in your life. There's so many different variations, but the only person who knows you is you. And that's through self-reflection, self-awareness, doing the inner work, and writing your tribute is part of that. You're able to really kind of zoom out and look at your life and, honor those people that you want to honor, but also honor yourself, because, people don't remember all these little memories that I have because they weren't there for it. That was me existing in my body.
Right.
They don't know all these little moments that I had, even with my first love, Andy. I wrote about him heavily in my tribute because he set the tone of the exact kind of relationship and life that I wanted. And I didn't even know that till I went through my tribute. I didn't realize the impact that he had, but he's gone and no one would ever know that. And I want to honor his memory. And without me going through the process, I never would have been able to do that, which was crucial for me because it just was such a devastating loss. And there's something so magical about being a teenager, and it's all the hormones and the emotions. And we competed together in sports, and he was funny, and we were like a big family on our swim team. It was such a short, magical point in my life that set the tone of, all right, I want this for my life. I want this. And we were always laughing. There was so much joy. And to this day, I've told my current partner, Dave, I said, honey, like you are everything that I've ever wanted. Like this whole experience is everything I've ever wanted. And I learned that through Andy, through that blip in time. And I never would have known that. It was grief. I couldn't face it. I didn't want to look at it. It was uncomfortable. And I think a lot of people do that with their own grief. They're not able to take a step back and see how it's impacting their lives. And grief isn't just limited to death. Grief can be from a divorce, a failed opportunity, the loss of a friendship, any kind of thing like that. So I think that our relationship with grief can evolve in a more modern way when you go through something like this.
The sponsor for this episode of The Heart of Hospice is Odonata Care. Odonata Care founders Nancy Hireman and Brenda Kazire are certified hospice and palliative nurses with over 40 years combined experience. They are experts in end-of-life care. Nancy and Brenda have created a 32-page booklet called The Care Plan, A Path to Comfort for the Hospice Patient. Their goal is to empower patients and their caregivers with valuable information right at their fingertips, wherever and whenever they need it. Odonata Care also offers a suite of 50 free training videos on YouTube that teaches the basics of bedside care for personal and professional caregivers. Odonata Care's motto is "Care is treatment," which is why their bottom line is caring for the patient. Nancy and Brenda have a mission to transform the end-of-life experience through education and support. You can purchase copies of the Care Plan for yourself or your hospice agency at thecareplan.net. And look for their new Spanish version coming to their online store very soon. Now, back to today's episode.
If we're truthful when we're writing our own tributes, you get a very intimate look, a very authentic look at ourselves, but you're telling a very authentic story, a very intimate story. But you have outside writers,
Mm-hmm.
that are for hire through My Modern Tribute. What's the value of having an outside writer versus, like you're saying, having your cousin or your sister do it?
Well, not only do you have the outside writer, but I personally am walking them through it as well. And you have a team that are looking at your life in a way that a person isn't even able to see. So we like to create a theme and kind of find one thing that links the person's story together. That is extremely hard to do on your own. Like I said, I tried to do it on my own and it was very emotionally chaotic. But when you have someone else who says, I noticed you said this, did you also think it could be connected to that? Or, like, for example, when my mother did her tribute, which she had a huge awakening, totally transformed her. It blew her mind. Her and my dad read it. They were crying together. My mom said, I actually want to share this now with all of you girls. I want you to know my story. But what my writer had done with hers, and the writer that did hers, she was a physician's assistant for 14 years, exceptional writer, great bedside manner, just very open, very loving, witty, hilarious. I love her. I truly love her. But so she wrote my mom's, and she made the connection that my mom, because my mom is very, she finds safety and comfort in numbers, and she's a bookkeeper. And the opening line of opening paragraph of her tribute talks about that numbers are trustworthy and they're safe and they don't lie and they don't tell half truths. And my mom read that and she just broke down thinking, like, how did she know this? How did she make that connection? But we're able to see it objectively and look at, whereas, through a lived experience, you're still looking at it, but you may miss a few spots. There's always a blind spot when you look at your life and yourself. And
Sure.
we kind of help fill in those gaps and present those gaps in a way that is meaningful.
Do you ever have anybody that says, once the tribute's written, by one of your writers, that comes back and says, you know what? It's too open. It's too exposed for me. And I want to take pieces of it out, or I don't want you to use it. Do you ever have anybody that backs away from it?
That only happened once. And it was the first tribute. It was actually the one that I wrote. It was my very first tribute that I wrote. And it was deeply I mean, the whole bit, I mean, the whole piece, except for talking about her daughter, was of extensive trauma. And I did a good job relaying it in a way that, because we discussed how she wanted it out, but it was a very different process. I was still in the, infant stages of figuring the process out. And she said, I'm so glad I did this, but I can't ever release this to anybody. And I said, that's okay. Like, whatever you want to do with it, it's up to you. No one's forcing you to read this out loud. But it was hard for her to read it on paper because it was a level of exposure. And that's when I realized that I needed to be very aware of the ability of the client to go. I didn't want to re-traumatize a client, is my point. I wanted to make sure that they were at a stable place in their life, because there is an element to, what if you have someone who has severe mental health, issues at the moment, and they're hurting and they're desperate for connection, but this takes them down a dark path, like a different outcome than we want.
Right.
However, that hasn't happened since. And usually the people that come to me are within my own network or in a cancer space, and I'm able to read that energy right away. I'm very aware, but I'm very cautious. I don't think I would take or have us take on a client if I sense that right away. And usually there's some wording or signs. And again, I'm not a healthcare professional, but I know someone who's hurting in a way where, your internal alarms go off. I consider myself pretty intuitive, and I can tell that. Otherwise, no, every single client blown away, like outstanding results. And that's been, a good sign. Okay, we've got our process. We know our client, but we know which direction to go. And that's been extremely rewarding. Like I had mentioned to you, is that I love watching the client transform from, they say, okay, I want to do this. And okay, I filled out the questionnaire. And that wasn't too hard, because our questionnaire just goes over some basic facts, where you were born and family members' names, make sure we had the spelling and those details ironed out. And then the interview. And I always call them after the interview, or I do a quick text, hey, did it go okay? Are you in a good spot? And it's always just like a cathartic response of, that was so moving. And, your writer's amazing. I feel cleansed. I feel like a burden's been lifted. And then there's the actual first draft. And most of the time there's hardly any edits. Like, an edit may be, this date, it was actually May 2nd. I remembered it wrong. Or, I want to add, this one person's name, but there's not a lot of edits afterwards, which is good. So that way the process doesn't go on for too long, but we do a great job at capturing it all. The bulk of it, I'd say about 95% on the first shot.
Sounds like it's cathartic and therapeutic, but I can see how going back and rereading is a little bit of triggering and reliving. But I would think that for people who are going back and reading about some of the things they did, maybe it's a little bit validating about the value of the life. And, this is actually, I've been on this great adventure, and it was a whole lot better than when I think about it, just reading it out like that, I think would be very validating, and say, my life has actually been pretty cool. I've done some interesting things.
My dad's reads that way. He's, again, I love my father. He's a very stable civil engineer. He's lived a typical life of, you grow up with your family and on a farm in Pennsylvania, and then you go to college, you get your degree, and then you find a wife, and then you have the 4 kids in suburbia. It was very much that
picket fence.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like Cape Cod style home in the mountains growing up. Like, it was very dreamy, every day that goes by as I get older, I appreciate my parents more and more. Just very community involved and the most giving individuals. But his tribute reads very like a confirmation of purpose. And that's what he told me. He said, I read my tribute. He said, sweetie, I feel like my confirmation of purpose and I'm on the right path has been, that was his biggest takeaway. And he's very traditional man, very into legacy and antiques, and has all the, family heirlooms in his office. And so I was raised very, very traditional. which is fun because, our conversations, I'm a very open person. So it's been, it's always a fun time kind of exploring these topics and life events together. But a tribute also in that sense serves as a way to connect with your family or your loved ones, because who's to say you don't need to, again, it's up to you, but I tell clients, you don't need to hide it. You can actually bring this out and you can show it to your family or your partner and say, I don't know if you knew I felt this way, because it's not always easy to come out and say these things. For me, it is. I love telling. I'm a words of affirmation person. That's my love language. So I love to tell everyone how I feel, and having a stronger relationship with my own mortality has created a whole new view and sense of purpose, and has literally brought so much life back into my body, and thinking I'm not even guaranteed the next 5 minutes. And I have my tribute written, which is great. If anything were ever to happen to me, my daughter has my words. That's the most important thing to me. She needs to know my journey, my path. I want her to have that. I want her to have my guidance if, I'm gone. But it's such a magical thing every day to say, you know what, I'm not going to let certain things get to me, because I know that the clock is ticking. It really is. And when you have that approach on life, things aren't so bad anymore. You don't find someone's driving habits to be as irritating anymore. And you think, it doesn't really matter. Now I'm like, you know what? I just don't feel like getting irritated about that anymore, because I'm just happy to be here. I'm happy to be healthy and breathing and be around my loved ones. So it brings about, and I've heard that from other clients too. They say, wow, life is precious. And because you're looking at it on paper, now you're looking at your life. And that's a whole other conversation of how do you take your tribute and your relationship with your own mortality and turn it into a way of creating a more fulfilling life for yourself. And I can talk about that for for hours, because that is the way that I live.
You take your eulogy and you turn it into a love story for your life. It's a love letter to your life.
That's a great way to put it.
Absolutely. So,
it's your own love story.
Yeah,
I love that.
I like that. So tell me about the process. If somebody wanted to work with My Modern Tribute, how does that work?
Contact me through our socials or email. And then, we go over what their goals are, what they're thinking. There's always an initial conversation of here's where I'm at in my life. And, we discuss that, and I send them a questionnaire. It's 10 questions, and they fill that out. They send it back when they're able to. And then I line up the call time with their writer of choice. What I have found is for the cancer patients and the healthcare side, at this time, I only have writers working with those patients who have a healthcare background, because I believe having that level of bedside manner is crucial. And I have found that to be the most successful. So, which is a whole other exciting opportunity where I think, okay, if there's any burnt out healthcare workers who want to work remotely, I have a great opportunity for you. If you're open to working on your writing skills, this would be an exceptional opportunity. You can work anywhere, because you're just doing a phone call or Zoom, and then it's all over email. Sure. And so then I line up the interview with the writer, make sure everything's squared away and get payment. And they have the interview. And then usually within 10 business days, they get their first draft. But my writers they just dive right in immediately, because they don't want to lose momentum and steam. And it's usually within a few days,
right?
Which is pretty cool.
They want to write when it's fresh.
You do get a sense of, I call it the ultimate high, because you explored someone's life with them. Like, you dove into all the emotions, all the feelings, all of everything about what makes them them. And you just get so excited, and you need to ride that wave while you can. You don't let it sit. And we all feel that way. And I felt it was important, because when I decided to do this business, I told you that one tribute that I had written, and I experienced that myself. So I understand what it's like to be the writer. I understand what it's like to be the client, because I went through it myself. And I understand all aspects of the business, which was very important for me to do. That way I can show up for everyone and be the best support system that I can be. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward. We try to keep it low tech, low fuss, make sure that it's accessible to as many people as possible. and keep it as it should be, a very human, authentic experience.
Just out of curiosity, did your dad write his own tribute or did you write it for him?
No, we had a writer do it.
Really? You had somebody else?
But he was one of our first guinea pigs. Yeah. So what we did when I was interviewing writers, I said, well, I have to know how you'd put one together. And since this is basically a new genre of writing, I know we're all figuring this out together. One of the writers who was interviewing, I just sensed her personality and I thought, oh, she'd be great for my dad. And so he said, I'll be your guinea pig. But my mom was one of our first paid clients. So both of their experiences were drastically different. And after my dad actually read my mom's, he said, oh gosh, that sounds like a movie. I feel like I need to redo mine now. And I said, well, Dad, yours is the free guinea pig experience. So if you want to come back, you know where to find us. But his is still beautiful and it sounds just like him. But also to that effect, I believe that when he said, okay, well, my mom sounded like a movie, that's because she had a traumatic background. Her upbringing was very challenging and her story is a heroic one. So of course, on paper, it reads in just a story of overcoming unspeakable things and how her attitude and her resilience. I mean, it's beautiful. I read it and I was sobbing my eyes out. And we were able to, even deepen our relationship over it because I didn't know some of those things that had happened.
So Sarah, one last question for you. You shared that in your tribute, you wrote about your first love, that first grief, that big loss that you had. What is something else special or something that you hold very dear that's included in your tribute?
Oh, my daughter, for sure. I wrote a lot to her about, if something were to happen to me, you need to know these things. And it was a lot about, because she is very similar to me. I mean, you meet her and larger than life personality. She's just extraordinary. And like myself, I needed quite a bit of guidance because there was just a lot going on. And so it was a lot of confirmation of there is nothing wrong with you. You are spectacular as you are. And hold on to that love and that light that you have. And there's a lot of just pep talks, I guess, for a good way to put it, but me giving her a lot of guidance and wisdom that I knew would carry over the years in different areas of her life. That was one of the most important parts. That's the sole reason of why I wanted to do it. But it was also, because there's many reasons why you would do a tribute. So that was very special, is being able to get that out. And then also I wrote some really funny things to my family. I'm kind of the comedian of the family. So I put in, very special memories and lines to, my sister and I can't ruin. I almost want to share it, but I don't want to ruin it in case
No.
were to happen one day and they want to hear it.
No spoilers.
But no spoilers. But it was so fun putting that in there because I want them to still have joy even in my and honor me for who I am, which is a very joyful person. So it was really special weaving those jokes, family jokes and inside jokes into things, because I just imagine, all right, if they're sitting in a room and that comes out, they're going to be like, of course, Sarah had to put that in there. So that to me was very, very special. So I hold my tribute very near and dear to my heart. And as open as I am, I do not share it with a lot of people. Only certain little sentences and whatnot, but it's just so only my inner circle has seen it.
Yeah.
I do love it. And sometimes I look through it, even as if I'm having a hard day, because when I did have my tribute written, I was, like I said, regulated. I was calm. I was in a very open state. And I look back on it, I'm like, wow, I do have some good advice. I should take that advice right now. And I believe that everyone should have theirs done. However, people come to us when they're ready. And it has to be people know when they're ready. They just know, because I'll get random messages from someone I haven't spoken to in a while. And they say, okay, I really want to do it now. And I'm like, I haven't talked to you in 6 years, but yeah, let's go for it. Let's do it. Let's dive right in. No topics off limits. There's no judgments. There's no, that's the biggest thing, is we really have created a space of love and connection, and whatever you say goes, and we just follow your lead. And we have the most beautiful people that come through, just extraordinarily gifted, witty, hilarious, beautiful, resilient humans. And it, every time, it just gets me. I'm like, I can't believe that this is what I get to do for a living. So I feel very honored, very honored. I was going to read one little example. So I did want to share this one little snippet from a client example that is being shared with permission. And this was all that she wrote about her mother that had abandoned her. I've often wondered how our mom could abandon her kids, just walking out, never showing back up, never saying a word. She was part of the legacy of silence. Sometimes alone in my room, I would wonder, does she ever think about me on my birthday? When I was a senior in high school, my brother found out where she was living, above a bar in the town next over. And we took my brothers, my husband, and myself to see her. I don't know what I had expected, but that wasn't it. It was clear that she loved the bottle more than us kids, and there were no apologies, no pining, no expressed regrets. She showed us some old family photo albums, and it felt cold and surreal, like witnessing a time warp. At least now I know where I came from. And it was very important for that client to have that written so her children knew where she had come from, the lack of the maternal influence that she had, and to ultimately say, listen, I was the generational breaker of this cycle, and this is what I overcame to give this love to my children, to you all, which was the main theme. Was I broke the cycle. I got out of that situation. And that was very important in her reeling that through her tribute as part of her soul narrative and her theme. So that was a beautiful experience. That's one of my favorites. Anytime you have a story of resilience, it just sends me.
And that's very powerful.
It's truly inspiring.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So, Sarah, how can the listeners connect with you, connect with your work, and hire a writer to have their own tribute written?
Well, you can find us on Instagram, My Modern Tribute, and also on Facebook, again, My Modern Tribute. And you can email me at sarah@mymoderntribute.com. Just shoot us a message and I'll be your point of contact.
Awesome. Sarah, thanks for talking with me today. I love the work that you're doing. You're creating so much meaning.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
So I guess if you want to really hone it down to its basic element, My Modern Tribute is a eulogy, but it's way more than that. Way more than that. And that's a good thing, because when you talk about eulogies, what is the first thing you think of? Death and loss. You write your own eulogy, you tell a bunch of big lies about how wonderful you were, or somebody else writes your eulogy and quite frankly, they tell a bunch of big lies about how good you were. I don't know that a eulogy is a very inspiring essay or piece of writing. But Sarah, through My Modern Tribute, has created a service where you can expand that story and really tell it in a very authentic, inspiring way. She was inspired by the death of her friend, her first love, she said, at 17. And she's inspired by the desire to hear about other people's stories. She believes people should be able to write their own life story. For a lot of people, that's a hard thing. Writing is just a form of communication, and let's face it, we're not great as communicators a lot of times. So writing is hard. And when you have to sit down and write your own story, I think a lot of people would say, oh, I didn't do anything special. I'm not very important. I didn't do anything monumental. I didn't go to the moon. I'm not a nuclear physicist. My life's been pretty boring. But when they sit down with someone else, share what they know about their own lives, and they get that tribute back, Sarah said they're amazed. It's validating, I think, in a way. To read this, it's not that somebody's perspective is different. They're not observing your life. They're just taking your details and telling the story for you. What Sarah describes is life-changing for people to read that about themselves. And using the outside writers, the writers that come on the team with My Modern Tribute, it helps people reveal their blind spots, things that they wouldn't see as interesting or important in their lives. And then they realize, well, yeah, this did have value. People often say that the process of writing a tribute is cathartic, which makes sense. Journaling is cathartic. It's therapeutic. So writing a tribute is cathartic. If you're interested in having Sarah or one of her team write a tribute for you, check out mymoderntribute.com. You can find them on Facebook and Instagram as well. Find out the services they're doing and find the power of the tribute for yourself. Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram and send your questions or comments by email to me at helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.